It's the final episode in my 6-part series about cruising on the Columbia River with American Cruise Lines. In this episode, the ship will go through the locks at the Bonneville Dam, then we'll sail under the Bridge of the Gods on the way to our final destination, Stevenson, Washington. Then we take an excursion to a ridiculously beautiful waterfall, Multnomah Falls, before finally having to say goodbye and flying home. When we left off in episode 5, the ship was cruising from west to east in a scenic little stretch of the river just outside Portland, Oregon. In fact, at one point, we sailed right past the International Airport in Portland, where most of us would be flying out of tomorrow at the end of our cruise. But these last few hours of sailing on the river today were really gorgeous because we're sailing through the scenic Columbia River Gorge. Here's a little montage of some of the things we sailed past here on day 7 of our cruise. One of the big highlights of this last day of cruising was going through the locks at Bonneville Dam. Here's a time-lapse video that captures it perfectly. With the locks of the Bonneville Dam behind us now, the next scenic moment was sailing under the Bridge of the Gods. It was built over 100 years ago at a narrow point in the river to allow cars to travel between Oregon and Washington. In 1927, shortly after the bridge was built, Charles Lindbergh flew his plane, the Spirit of St. Louis, along the Columbia River, and Lindy famously flew his plane under the Bridge of the Gods. There are no photographs of Lindbergh flying under the bridge, but the artist Paul Anquist depicted it in a famous poster. Just a little bit east of the Bridge of the Gods was our final destination for the cruise, the small town of Stevenson, Washington. Population, about 1,500 people. I put my drone up in the air for a look around. You can see that we're still on the green west side of Washington. All those trees on the hillsides sure look gorgeous. Stevenson is about 40 miles east of the big city of Portland, Oregon. Tomorrow morning, when we disembark the ship at the end of the cruise, the ACL buses will drive us all to the airport in Portland for our flights home. While I had the drone up in the air, I flew it over to the other side of the river to take a look at something I was curious about. In the background, you can see the Bridge of the Gods, which we sailed under a little while earlier. But this thing right there in the center of the screen is what I wanted to see. It's called the Cascade Locks and Canal. Prior to 1938, at this part of the river over here, there used to be a nasty set of rapids that ships couldn't get past. So a canal and a set of locks was built to get ships past it. But when the Bonneville Dam was constructed a few miles downstream in 1938, the Cascade Locks and Canal were flooded by the new lake behind Bonneville Dam. So what we're looking at right here is all that remains of the old Cascade Locks and Canal. All we're seeing is the top. There's much more to it down under the water. Once the Bonneville Dam was constructed, the old rapids and all but the top of the locks were flooded and now are under quite a bit of water. And while we're here, we sure do have a good view of the Bridge of the Gods. Stevenson is one of the windiest spots on the Columbia River, so it's a very popular spot with windsurfers. If you look in front of the bow of our ship, and if you're watching on a large enough screen, you'll see a windsurfer sailing past the ship on his way to the middle of the river. And if you look over to the left, there's actually another windsurfer just getting set up in the water. His orange board makes him a little easier to see right next to the shore. He's just about to put his sail up so that he can follow his buddy out for some windsurfing on the river. Now, most of us on the ship are probably a little too old for windsurfing, so we won't be doing that, but we do have big plans for the afternoon. After a nice lunch on board the ship, the ACL buses took us on a gorgeous excursion to Multnomah Falls. This is one of the most photogenic spots on the Columbia River. This is one of the 2 excursions during this cruise that I consider a must-do, the other one being the jet boat excursion into Hell's Canyon. Multnomah Falls is just ridiculously gorgeous. Make sure you have your camera with you. And I want to point out this viewing area that is just about to come into view. It's very accessible. From the parking lot where our bus parks, you can get here in a scooter or a wheelchair without going up any steps. And it has a spectacular view of the falls. This is the spot where you're going to want to pose for a photo. And be sure to shoot some video with your phone, so when you get home, you'll have something to help you remember the beautiful waterfall along the Columbia River called Multnomah Falls. Here's one last shot of the falls, and there's something I want to point out at the base of this bridge here. I want you to take a careful look in the water because there are fish. Here's a close-up so that you can see them a lot better. If they want to swim up this creek, they're going to have a real hard time when they get to the falls. While I was shooting the little creek at the base of the falls, I got lucky. I was in the right place at the right time with my camera recording when this Union Pacific train came along, the last train I saw during a train-filled cruise along the Columbia River. Back to the ship now, with everyone returning after our excursion to Multnomah Falls. Since this was the very last night of our cruise, cocktail hour was an especially big deal tonight. The champagne was flowing, for sure. I hope you know by now that All of the alcoholic beverages are included with your cruise. You don't have to buy a drink package or anything like that. Drink as much as you want. And not just limited to cocktail hour either. They can make drinks for you in the restaurant with your meals. And there's another bar in the Sky Lounge that's open most of the day. In addition to this one here in the River Lounge, which is open in the evenings so that you can enjoy a drink during the enrichment presentations and all the other activities that happen in the River Lounge, like activities led by our cruise director and musical performances by the various entertainers that come aboard. The next morning, this was the view as we prepared to leave the ship at the end of our cruise. The crew took our bags out to the buses for us, and after an uneventful ride into Portland, I was at the airport in plenty of time for my 9:45 a.m. flight with Alaska Airlines. It had been a really great week on American Encore, starting with the christening ceremony for ACL's new ship, sailing through the locks at 4 different dams on the Snake River and 4 more on the Columbia River. I saw lots of trains running alongside the river as we took a slower, more relaxing ride on the river itself. The scenery was wonderful as we cruised down the river, and the places we visited along the way were really interesting, and the activities were a lot of fun. If you're new to ACL and you don't know which of their itineraries to choose for your first cruise, this is the one, the 9-day, 8-night Columbia and Snake River cruise. And if you're an ACL fanatic and you've already done the Columbia River cruise, consider coming back for the new longer version that they now offer, a 16-day, 15-night version of the trip that I just did that spends more time in some of the destinations, and 6 of the 16 days are just days spent cruising on the river and enjoying the views. I would absolutely love that. When you're ready to book your next cruise with ACL, I know that my travel agent can make things easier for you, handling all the details for you and arranging extra days in hotels before and or after the cruise to give you even more time to explore the area. She can arrange private transportation for you and set up your air travel arrangements. And out of all the travel agents out there, I would bet that mine is the most knowledgeable regarding American cruise lines. The most recent statistics from over 11,000 travel agents nationwide ranked Caitlin Gallagher's agency, Ambrin Travel, at number 1 for bookings with American cruise lines. So contact Caitlin when you're ready to set up your next cruise. I'm Jim Zim. Thanks for watching.